Now, the theme for the conference is presence, emergence, and impact. And when I read that sentence, and it talks about how you set up an idea factory, what I wanted to start the conversation with is that, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about creativity, they start from the ideas. But in my view, there's something that comes before ideas, and that's our presence. What do you think of that?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by presence. Do you want to give me a one-liner of what you mean by that, and then I can respond?
Before you created the idea factory, you know, in my view, you had a certain kind of presence, you had your passion, you had your, you know, the energy that was motivated to create something like that. And what I'm saying is that for that idea factory to be created, there needed to be something that existed before that. The ideas emerged from your presence. The ideas emerged from that passion that you held to create something.
Well, I would agree with that. I think that presence, as I understand it from Peter's work, is kind of a combination of psychological predisposition and character, life experience, intuitive ability to connect the dots. So you have this rich soup of material from which to draw from. And so in a way, it harkens back to some classic religions where the stuff of existence is all there, but it requires manifestation. And the manifestation comes from intention, which in turn is shaped by desire. And it could be a desire for social justice. It could be a desire for creative expression. And then the specifics begin to crystallize. And in this case, around a venture.
And a lot of creatives, they talk about creating something from nothing. And it's as though they become catalysts. Their presence becomes a catalyst for making things, for joining those dots. And it's as though they have created something which didn't exist. And it's because they have simply seen the patterns and seen what is needed and responded to that by connecting the dots.
Well, I resonate with that as well. I've often described the creative process as going from 0 to 1, you know, that you start with a beginner's mind or a blank sheet of paper. You have your predispositions, which we might define partly as presence, you know, so it's the ground on which something new can emerge. But that's the drama of creativity. It's about that manifestation. I mean, there are different kinds of creativity, obviously, and as creativity shades into innovation, there's incremental improvement and instrumental considerations and so forth and so on. But at the moment of creation, where previously there had been nothing, the drama of reaching inside yourself, you know, James Joyce talked about, you know, reaching inside to forge the conscience of his generation. You manifest something that exists where nothing had existed before. And it doesn't have to be some profound lightning bolt or paradigm shift. You know, jazz musicians, an art form that I'm quite familiar with, manifest that creativity every moment that they're on stage improvising.
That's right, because you're a musician and you're an entrepreneur, and some people, they, as you said earlier, creativity expresses itself in different ways, and the skill set of being a musician, that also, you're creating something from nothing. When you're joining one note with another note and making music from these different notes, right, you are creating something from nothing, aren't you?
That's right. And then the pattern of improvising with notes, I find, is equally applicable to improvising with words. You know, we're improvising right now in this conversation because we don't know exactly where it's going to go 30 seconds from now or what the actual words are that are going to come out of our mouths, but we're adopting some of the same practices that great jazz musicians do. We're listening, we're looking for nonverbal cues, we're, you know, working on making the conversation, in this case, with words, sound really good. But those those patterns are also applicable in life. You know, I've always looked at my pathway as improvisation. You know, some people take out a piece of sheet music, and at the age of 17, they plan and they know exactly what they're going to do, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I've been much more on the improvisational side.
Also with your career as well, I imagine.
My non-linear, non-career.
Yeah, that's such a different mindset, isn't it? Like you have one mindset where people set themselves goals, and they set themselves like a linear trajectory so that they will reach these milestones and their end-term goals until they retire, and then that's after they retire, then that's when they engage with their hobbies and
Do what they really want to do.
what they really want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody like yourself, if you have the courage, I suppose it does require a great deal of courage and trust in yourself and self-confidence to start off with doing what you want to do rather than postponing it until you retire.
Yeah, I made a promise to myself that I would only do things that interested me deeply. And if I stopped having fun, I would stop doing those activities right away. I mean, obviously, you have to make a living. You have to put food on the table. You have to have a roof over your head. So figuring out what some philosophers call the material question enables a more freewheeling kind of life. So there are practicalities as well. But I've always lived by passions as a North Star, not, rational planning.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the other point of view is like some people try to commercialize their passion, and that doesn't work. You know, they're passionate about things, but they don't create enough value to be able to make that their bread and butter activity.
Well, there are all kinds of storylines. You know, sometimes you have great passion, but you don't manifest anything that is valuable. And sometimes you have passion and you manifest something that's valuable, but it's not positioned properly, and so nobody pays attention to it. Sometimes you manifest something and it catches on like hotcakes. So, and some of it is based on skill. Most of it, I would argue, the majority of the considerations are about skill and experience. But a lot of it has to do with luck as well, and timing, being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to go on to next. It's our presence, but within an environment that is conducive to enable us to create value. Because, okay, so if we talk about presence as being the starting point of creativity, then we have the presence of people who may be living in impoverished areas of inner cities where they feel frustrated because they don't have a job and they feel they don't have the resources to engage with their passions. What do you say to that?
I think that's very true. I think that Bill Gates, for example, had a lot of advantages. He was a student at a private school that had one of the first timeshare terminals and limitless computing, or abundant computing time that he could do whatever he wanted with. He came from a well-to-do family. His mother had a relationship with IBM, so he had great insight into what an operating system that might be attractive to them would look like, since they were a big company that wasn't looking at the new emerging technologies. And, there are millions of kids around the world who are just as smart as Bill Gates, but they didn't grow up in that environment. So one of the most exciting things about the shifting landscape these days is that the opportunity to innovate and to create value is becoming much more democratized, and a lot of it has to do with the much more even flow of information and learning opportunities that come about through the wiring up of the world.
And presence and visibility go hand in hand as well, because I'm thinking about the impact on your positioning as a result, even from things like featuring in a book like this, and the businesses that you've created, the impact, the presence of those things that you've created, they in turn transform your presence. It's as though someone becomes more visible, and as they become more visible, they become more present, and there's that feedback loop that success attracts success, right?
Well, yeah, you know, I grew up in an academic family and with fairly traditional values, and the idea that you would sell or market yourself was anathema. You know, the work should speak for itself. But these days, the fine line, the line between, let's say, publishing your ideas and marketing your ideas, especially in an era of social media and content marketing and so on, is a very fine and blurry line. So in an era where you can publish something on the internet and have it become viral and have it have unexpectedly large impact, I think there's a whole new skill set in terms of connecting your brain with its new thoughts with many brains out there, which isn't mediated by traditional academic you know, gating factors or print publishing, or, you know, a lot of the rigmarole of traditional academic life.
With traditional academic life, you know, we have to rely on gatekeepers to evaluate our work in a positive way, and it's usually not democratic. Those articles that get published in the best journals may simply gather dust for decades, but they have been evaluated well. Whereas in social media, somebody could write a highly influential article, and it's because the influence emerges in an unforeseen kind of way. People connect the dots, and we think about stories like George Floyd's story. That story has gained so much momentum, it's gained so much power, and it emerged. It wasn't planned. Nobody, you know, the young teenager who videotaped that story, she had no idea what would emerge from her placing that on social media. So the most powerful things are emerging without any gatekeepers there to evaluate the quality, or, you know, the value.
Well, another way of looking at it is that, you know, the traditional academic publishing game, if I can call it that, is about anointing experts who then become gatekeepers. And I'm not against that. I think there is definitely a role for expertise. But what the new technologies have enabled is a democratization of opinion. So the whole idea of social filtering and social recommendation, and you know, the rationalization of citations so that you see the influence that academic articles have. And, you know, it's Amazon, you know, is your book 3 stars or 5 stars or 1 star? And that didn't come from an editorial board. It comes from citizens. So, you know, I don't think anything is perfect, but what you just described and what I agree with is that there's been a disintermediation of the traditional methods of assessing and anointing work. And it's good in the sense that it democratizes the process, so more ideas can get out there and be subjected to the kind of Darwinism of public opinion. And at the same time, there is room for expert opinion. I mean, one of the issues with the proliferation of information mediated by the internet is, number one, it's hard to navigate because there's so much of it. So curation becomes really important. And then the other is that it's often, you know, the material that's shared is often false and maybe even manipulative and propagandistic and so on, to the point where having validation becomes very important as well. And having expert opinion that can put things into context, because things are complicated now. They're not simple. And so there are a lot of different opinions about what the right way to do things is. And having reference to experts becomes important.
And I suppose it's the complexity and the interdependence of all sorts of information. It's not, we can't evaluate ideas in isolation. We have to think about the broader context and the interdependence with lots of different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask someone on the, a passerby on the street what they think about synthetic biology and its impact on industry, I would bet that most people wouldn't have an opinion. So there's just a lot of things to know about, and not very many people who are in the business of explaining things or making them relevant to people on Main Street.
At this point in time, during the coronavirus pandemic, in a way, this has forced everyone to take a different perspective on how we work and how we do business and how we live our lives, even to the extent of how we relate with our family members. There have been months when it was decided for us who we should meet and who we should not meet, even if they were related to us. So in what way have you responded as a creative person, and what has emerged from this different way of the external environment being so different?
Well, while I miss direct social interaction and contact, I have actually found this period to be quite energizing in terms of not only supporting my connection to my existing network of colleagues and friends, most of whom don't live in the city in which I live. So I've accumulated lots of relationships that are far flung. But also, it's been a period of establishing a lot of new relationships because people are more willing to sit still for a conversation on Zoom or another video conversation platform than they would have been pre-pandemic, when people are busy and they're out of their offices and they don't have the time. So it's kind of funny. I mean, there's a lack of intimacy in seeing people on a screen, but there's an enhancement of intimacy in the sense of being able to connect with people in a meaningful way that wasn't possible before. So there are people, for example, that I only see when I'm in their city and I happen to be passing through. And now that's not an option, but I can speak with them every week and work on something or explore some shared interests. I find that, at least in my circles, that people are more willing than ever to collaborate. And this hunger to connect has a very constructive air to it, because the people I'm talking with want to do things that I find kind of interesting. So there's been an upsurge in interesting activity as well.
And so for those connections to be meaningful and to be powerful, are we saying that it's not really that important to be physically present with each other? It's the connection, regardless of whether it's virtual. The two of us, we're having this conversation. We've never met in the physical realm, but we're having a virtual conversation, and it's about the connections that we make and the creativity that arises from these connections.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I think that meeting somebody virtually, not having had a face-to-face encounter with them, is in no way a necessary inhibitor of creative collaboration. And in fact, because of the efficiency with which you can have interaction, it can be an enabler. We might decide, for instance, hypothetically, that there was something we wanted to keep talking about, and we might say, well, let's schedule several 30-minute conversations to do that. And that, geography would prevent that. Meeting would be a special event, but now collaboration becomes far more, it's supported and enabled and made more efficient by the technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And now let's think about presence as an individual and presence within groups. Our presence in relation to others, and what emerges when we are being creative as an individual in isolation, and what emerges when we are part of these collaborative groups.
Well, they're both important and different. I find that having solo time not only requires but benefits from a certain level of mindfulness and playfulness and openness to having things emerge. And it could be a thought bubbling up. It could be being inspired by something in my personal environment, whether it's a book or a piece of art or The tools that I have to do video production, which have kind of sprouted up in the last few months in my home. Trusting that things can emerge solo is important, but then on the interactive side, people are obviously catalysts for one another. And in jazz, there's a tradition of playing solo, and that's fine. And Bill Evans, the famous jazz pianist, referred to this in an album by the same title as Conversations with Myself. So there can be a dialectic and a mindfulness and so on. But jazz musicians will more typically play in ensembles because they're giving one another inspiration and energy and things to work on in real time. And it's the same thing with groups, teams that, are in a pre-startup mode or are working on a new project or something else. If that collaborative process is, properly facilitated and managed.
Yeah, and I suppose that again, it's to do with like who is the catalyst, and are we all catalysts for each other, or do we need to have one bright spark that enables that creativity to arise around them? Are we all stars, or do we rely on one person being the star catalyst, as it were?
Well, it's a funny question because having worked in Hollywood and on Broadway some, if you have a room full of stars, it's very hard to get anything done. So there has to be some direction. But if there's too much direction, then the creativity gets dampened and nothing happens. So I would look at it as, everyone, regardless of whether they're a high status star or not, needs to have a real sensitivity to facilitation and process in order to help and contribute to making things work in the best possible way. And in my experience, an enormous amount of time and energy is wasted in groups and in interactions because people don't know how to do it, or they don't know how to do it that well. They just kind of muddle through.
Right, that's interesting. And again, that leads me to this thing of, because some people say creativity requires action, and it's as though we've constantly got to be doing things and being with others and making a difference, as it were, externally. And there has to be a balance. There needs to be time for the incubation, for that internal transformation to take place. So there needs to be a balance between us taking action externally and that action being internal, reflective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the inaction, it doesn't mean being lazy. Inaction means being fallow and allowing things to emerge. And if you have too many preconceptions and you're too busy, chances are that you'll drown out new things.
Yeah.
Most people don't give themselves enough white space to have things emerge, and certainly in organizations, there's getting white space is a battle.
And I suppose the pandemic has been a blessing in that regard, that it's forced people to take time out.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, having huge chunks of unconstructed time has been a godsend. It's like being on sabbatical in a way. So I'm not complaining about it at all. And the fact that, the rhythms of life have been disrupted, when there's disruption, that can also give you a kind of a shock of the new and a need to reorganize yourself or remake yourself and your rhythms, which can be very useful.
And when you're creating your enterprises, when you're busy doing your business, how do you avoid getting burnt out?
Well, it's a very important question. I mean, I have my own formula. I don't know that it's super relevant for other people to follow it, but during the pandemic especially, I've been getting lots of physical exercise. So I actually bought a rowing machine the week before everything shut down and put it in my house, so I could have at least one good piece of exercise equipment to work on every day. I do a lot of music, which is very restorative. I am a kind of irregular meditation practitioner, usually to supplement the rhythms of other things I'm doing. I go for walks. I spend time with people that I can spend time with. Um, uh, and I monitor myself. So, if I feel like I'm getting stale or I'm less efficient and productive, or, I'm showing other signs of burning out, then, my instruction to myself is to stop and reassess immediately.
Yeah. Those spaces when we can just chill out and daydream, that sometimes becomes a luxury when we're so busy with our success, I suppose.
Right, but watching TV, some people might regard that as being a waste of time, and for me, sometimes what seems like wasting time is actually incubation time, or it's restoration time.
That's right. Yeah. And okay, so to summarize then, John, presence, emergence, and impact, in what way do you consider them to be of importance in the work that you do and in balancing your life?
Well, presence offers opportunities to increase the fertility of your environment. And it's both a set of cognitive adjustments, but it's also being aware of what supports you in your environment, whether it's your physical environment or your social environment or your intellectual environment. And that in turn increases the likelihood of something emerging, which is a process that needs to be supported and coaxed as well, because things that emerge are often very fragile or very transient. And then once emerged, they need to be supported so they turn into something so that they can have impact. And, not all ideas or insights that emerge have value or wind up being things to really work on, so having the ability to apply judgment at the right time in the process, not too early, but on a timely basis, is very important as well. So the three are almost like stages in the journey, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
And not a linear journey, because they kind of comment on each other and their feedback loops and so on.
That's right. That's what I love about the systems thinking that Peter Senge and Professor Capra, who I will be interviewing as well. He lives in San Francisco too. I was supposed to be interviewing him a couple of days ago, in fact, and because of the fires, I had to. Are you familiar with Professor Capra's work?
I'm aware of it. I'm not that familiar with it. Of course, I'm familiar with Peter's work because we knew one another when I was living in Boston, and we were kind of colleagues.
Yeah, Professor Capra wrote The Tower Physics back in the 80s.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm familiar with that. I think I even have that book on my shelf somewhere.
I've had it since the 80s, and so yeah. So he might be, I don't know how far he lives in Berkeley,
yeah, just across the bridge.
Across the bridge, yeah. Well, John, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm so grateful that you made this time available for us to have this conversation, and hopefully we will have many more.